I hope you like my little contraption. This is so y'all can hear me a little bit better. It's mic, etc. You know, it looks kind of funny. I like it. So today we're going to get a little bit controversial. We're going to talk about timely topics, not just the esoteric. And one of the things I'd like to talk about is checking up on your partner, your relationship, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your spouse, husband, or your wife. Should you be checking up on them in their phone, so for example, or their social media, or that sort of thing? And it's very interesting to me thinking about the history of this. So back in the day, if you look at the statistics for infidelity, which is essentially what we're talking about, being unfaithful, a spouse might find out about someone cheating on them, about their partner cheating on them through traditional means. Maybe they would see someone would see something and say something. Maybe there'd be a phone call out of nowhere. Maybe there would be some kind of message delivered to them. But it seemed like there weren't that many routes to check up on your spouse. And if your spouse wasn't present, or your partner, then you just didn't know what they were up to, and you didn't have access to the sort of insight about what they were thinking about, unless they actually told you. And so this is a question of privacy. And I think part of the question would be, should you read someone's diary back in the day? Let's say they wrote all their thoughts, all the things they were interested in, essentially their browser history for their life. You would get to decide that. Many people would be tempted, I'm sure, but you would also know that you were violating their privacy. So is it clear today? Let's say you share a computer, you share a browser. Let's say you glance at their telephone and there's a message that's popping up. You open up the laptop and their Facebook or their Instagram or other social media accounts are up. You can also follow who they're liking, who they're friending, what they're searching. So in this way, it's kind of unprecedented. So there's kind of a revolution, quote unquote, in data today, where you can be tracked with your phone via GPS, where the big companies like the Yahoos and the Googles and the Facebooks of the world know so much more about you. You know, in theory, they know when you're sleeping. They know your habits. I had read somewhere that like a phone company can see your data for 3 weeks, and then in the fourth week, even if you aren't carrying your phone, which is the source of the data that they have, if they're the phone company or the data company, they have like an 80%. No, don't quote me on this. There's not going to be any footnotes on this talk. They have an 80% chance of being accurate, predicting at any one time in the fourth week, even though you don't have your phone, where you're going to be. So similarly, there is an unprecedented amount of data available about your partner. Should you go looking? And on the one hand, I want to validate that infidelity is a huge thing, that it is not uncommon, that divorce also, statistically speaking, is somewhat common, depending on what the numbers that you look at are. I think all of them agree, but they differ as opposed to exactly what the percentages are of couples that end up in divorce. And then how many relationships do end up breaking up? First question is, I agree with Dan Savage, famous columnist out of Seattle, but has a national, international reach, that a relationship, even if it ends up in a breakup, you do not always necessarily need to consider it to be a failure, making air quotes, that you learn something from all of your relationships, the companionship, the interaction, the intimacy that you gained is still real, even if something happens. And again, we're also saying that infidelity is not that uncommon, even if it ended with infidelity on your part or on your spouse or partner's part. So the second question is, so yes, I understand if you have some suspicion and you're looking. I mentioned again in the past, there might be no way you would know unless you're going to literally follow your partner. Well, today, now you can do that. And from my understanding, in divorce proceedings in states that have to show cause, that Facebook is mentioned in an ever increasing amount as part of the divorce fault showing cause. So you can check up on your spouse. passwords aside, print aside, that kind of stuff, their laptop aside. The question is, should you? And so I consider in most cases, one, it is an act of deception. It is an act of violation to violate someone's privacy. And especially if you do it and you are not open with your partner after you did it, there's maybe an active omission. Is that such a thing? A passive omission and an active commission of deception. You're basically not telling your partner what you've done, what you suspect, what you're about. And I guess that's the main thing here. Even in the past, when you weren't able to play detective, unless you literally followed your spouse around, the one thing that you could do, and it's still true today, and it's the one thing I recommend most for couples, for people in general, is communicate. Talk to your partner, ask questions. And I don't mean accuse, I don't mean blame, I don't mean go negative. In fact, that's not communication in some sense, or it's the end of communication, because it will make your partner defensive. It will make them rush to strike back or some other kind of defensive posture. They will close down physically, and their brain will close down. They'll go to a fight or flight or freeze place in their brain, and they won't be able to intake the energy of what you're trying to say and then communicate actively with what you're trying to communicate with them. So yes, you should communicate with your spouse. If you have real questions and concerns, you should own them personally with I feel statements, and that's something I will talk more about down the line. But it's basically, I'm feeling concerned, I'm feeling doubt, I'm feeling curious, I have questions. And if you own that I feel, it's a lot more difficult for your partner to get defensive, because you're owning the feeling. And essentially it is your feeling. And I think the other thing we have to consider is there are people who are insecure and anxious and fearful. We're going to talk about attachment styles, not right now, but we will. And basically they have issues. We all have some kind of experience with the people who took care of us growing up, our parents and our grandparents and our family. Attachment is what it's called. It's a theory by Bowlby. And basically how you were treated as a child with your primary caregivers will determine how you are in relationship growing up. And that's something that can be addressed, changed, brought to a more intentional light, especially with therapy. But it isn't something that naturally will change from childhood to adulthood. It tends to stay the same. So if you have an anxious attachment, for example, you may tend to worry your relationship. You may tend to feel like they're going to abandon you, and possibly that they're cheating on you. And then this goes back to owning your stuff. That's your issue. Your spouse may or may not be about that, and it's complicated because of the choices that you make and the choices that they make. And of course, if they do, they're responsible for it. But your fear is something that you're responsible for. Your insecurity is something that you're responsible for. And how can you take responsibility for that? I have an earlier episode about mindfulness and meditation, and that as a skill can help you identify what you're feeling and to also own it, and also to be less reactive with it, and also to hold space for it and be able to, quote, stand those uncomfortable feelings and to know. And then this is how I recommend to talk to your spouse or partner. Knowing your issues, knowing yourself with self-awareness, with self-insight, and saying, I'm feeling worried about such and such. It's my stuff. I know, but I just need to talk to you about these sorts of things. The alternative is that a lot of people don't have self-knowledge or self-awareness. They don't know what motivates them. They don't know what they're about. And so instead, they're checking their spouse or partner or boyfriend or girlfriend's phone. If they do find something, again, we said it's not that uncommon, then they're going to justify it that way. And I guess in retrospect, you can round it up to, well, it was okay because you did find something. On the other hand, people are checking each other's browsing history. People are looking to see, well, are they looking at someone that could be a possible threat? Are they looking at pornography? And some people do consider pornography to be saying something negative about how their spouse or partner sees them. I don't see it that way. I think pornography is very common. I think that pornography usage can be problematic, but I don't think we start with the problematic. I think there's lots of reasons why it exists. That's a whole nother episode here. But for now, yes, considering why are you looking at your spouse's phone or their laptop or their Instagram, what's in it for you? And then, of course, this reflects back to you because it's really what you're about. The relationship is an extension of you. And again, how you relate to your partner is an extension of you. But it isn't solely about them, it's about you. And I think that's the place to look. So your relationship is a wonderful mirror to you about you. It's a wonderful place to learn and to grow. So that's what I've got for right now. None of this is intended to be diagnosing any kind of medical condition. Please see a doctor or a mental health professional if you find yourself in need. And be well out there.